Well, Ian Brady was jailed for life in 1966 for the murder of 12-year-old John Kilbride, 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey and 17-year-old Edward Evans. Since 1999, he's refused all food and has been force-fed via a tube from his nose to his stomach. Should Ian Brady be allowed to starve himself to death?
Would have the right to refuse food.
Is that justice in this country is not served by handing a multiple-choice tick box along with a sentence when you hand it down. You don't get to choose your punishment when you've been convicted of murder any more than you get to choose how many years you spend in prison. He doesn't have the right.
Kevin, do you believe purely on the human rights? The question, should he be allowed to commit suicide? The question is, does he have rights over his own body? We don't in the UK have a justice system that says, I sentence you to prison and we own your body. We don't have that system in the UK.
You know, to effectively commit suicide.
You don't have to agree with what he has done in order to acknowledge the fact that he should be treated in the same way as other people with human rights.
You understand why a lot of people have a huge problem. Reverend Jody?
Well, I think you have human rights by warrant of being a human being, actually, and I find myself agreeing with Cole in that actually some of this debate is irrelevant. If the law says that he can go, and then within...
So which is the compassionate thing to do, to abide by that human
Well, I think what we're actually
we're
talking about different understandings of justice, and within the wider... Well, within the wider understanding of justice, we have compassion, and who's that compassion for? It's actually for both the victim and the perpetrator, and I do think actually here we're talking a bit more about retributive justice, so that idea that because these crimes were so heinous, we really want that person to suffer.
But the law
but actually,
doesn't believe human rights are absolute, though. I mean, if you're a human and you deserve, and all humans deserve freedom, then how can you put a prisoner in jail because you're depriving them of their freedom? They haven't ceased being human, though, but because of their actions, they no longer deserve that right to freedom. So human rights have never been absolute in the Western law system.
But I think we're getting into a very different...
I'm confused. Why do you assume even if this man does have human rights, why is a human right to die? That is never been decided. If you say that rights are given by God, then God doesn't allow you to die. If you say they're chosen by society, why should society allow people to die? So why does anyone have the right to die?
Yes. There's so many behaviours in prison where you actually do surrender the right to your own body. You will be pinned down, you will be physically restrained. They lock the doors, by the way. That is a denial of freedom, a denial of choice, and it is a denial of bodily liberty. By locking the doors, they're telling you what you can and can't do with your body.
Well, betting shops have changed. They're no longer the preserve of devotees of the Racing Post studying form. Now you don't need to know anything about sport to stand as good a chance as anyone of winning on gaming machines known as fixed odd betting terminals. Place up to 100 quid on one of the casino games every 20 seconds if you want. You can win up to £500. Just remember, research shows the odds of finding a machine to play on are best in the poorest parts of Britain, the sort of place where the high street is run down and many of the locals work in low-status, poorly paid jobs. Does the law need to be tougher on gambling?
They're incredibly addictive. They're incredibly fast-paced. I think for a problem gambler, the ability to control the speed and stake is quite potent. Does the law need to be tougher on gambling? I think the current legislation needs to be properly enforced. The Gambling Act has 3 objectives. One is that gambling needs to be fair and open, not associated with crime and disorder, and it can't harm young and vulnerable people. And these machines, fixed odds betting terminals, they're in breach of all 3 of those.
Do you think they inevitably harm vulnerable people?
Yeah, I think they're highly addictive. There's 2 pieces of secondary research on the 2007 and 2010 British gambling prevalence surveys that show that they are the most addictive form of gambling. We recently polled 501 people in Newham, and 87% of people said that they were addictive, and 76% have spent more than they planned to, and 62% have gambled until all their money is gone. And these are all signs of addiction.
What's the most you lost?
In one sitting, about £2,500 in one afternoon. The machines are designed to distort your cognitive function. They're designed to make you make decisions you wouldn't otherwise make, so you don't make those rational choices that you would otherwise make if you were doing any other activity.
So they've been described by some as the crack cocaine of gambling. Do you endorse that description?
I do, yeah. They're certainly the most addictive form of gambling. Professor John E. Grant, who's an addiction psychologist, he says that the brain develops back to front. It develops desires before the ability to think through consequences and control behaviour. So young people are particularly susceptible to developing a problem.
Well, Christopher Snowdon, Institute of Economic Affairs, what about that description, the crack cocaine of gambling?
Yes.
Did you buy that?
No, not at all. I mean, this was very interesting. I wrote about this a couple of months ago and looked into the origins of this phrase, the crack cocaine of gambling. It's very rare that you'll see a news reporter or read a newspaper article about these machines without hearing it said that they have been dubbed the crack cocaine of gambling. In fact, every form of gambling since the mid-80s has been termed the crack cocaine of gambling. Casinos, online gambling, scratch cards, lotteries, everything has. It's a catch-all term. It's the way the
Phoenix, Association of British Bookmakers in Newham, right? 83 betting shops in the borough, 18 of them on one street. Do you applaud that?
I would say that's a reflection of the demand and the footfall in those areas, and they have been heavily regulated and socially responsible businesses investing in those town centres, creating jobs.
Yes, because it's very important this doesn't become an argument about whether or not gambling should be banned outright. Of course it shouldn't, but your arguments ignore psychology. Personal choice, this loosely libertarian argument that it's freedom of choice.
73% of the adult population in the UK is gambling. And problem gambling has remained stable and relatively low.
Gambling gambling per se, not gambling machines. Gambling per se is the crack cocaine. We have known since the 1950s how behaviour works, how behaviour is supported, reinforced, modified. My friend's dog, Chubby Wilson, is a prime example. If you give him a treat every so often, he'll do what you want him to do. You don't give him a treat every time, you give him a treat every so often. Skinner told us that variable rate reinforcement is the strongest way to develop and maintain behaviour, and gambling is exactly that. It's variable rate reinforcement. People keep putting the money into the machine in the hopes that once in a while they get a payout.
So we lose our self-control.
But there's a bigger issue about this.
This is interesting. I was chatting to you about earlier on. You said gambling is, it says in the Quran, gambling is Satan's work. Satan's plan is to excite enmity and hatred between you with intoxicants and gambling, hinder you from remembrance of Allah. So it's Satan's work, is it?
Well, indeed. I mean, what I would say is that if we're all about making responsible choices, we're all adults, so we can choose to do which industry we want to do and so on. Then illegalize crack cocaine itself, and people have the choice. It will employ people. They can donate to charity, yada 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 yada, and they can pay taxes, and the government can make money, and so on and so forth, which can then be spent on public service. We can always make this argument. Right? But I think that there's three main problems, main contentions I have, apart from the theological contention, and that is that...
Which is the one I just mentioned.
Yes, yes. That gambling is a parasitic kind of industry. It doesn't really contribute any resources, products, or enriching services. It's a vulture industry.
It's very exciting having money on a horse in a national.
It predates on poor mostly. That's why in recession, that's why gambling is almost recession-proof, basically, because and in recession it even increases the industry. It actually gets more profits.
The number of shops has stayed the same for the last 10 years.
Well, it's increasing in Newham. This is why we're having a discussion. And also that it ruins lives as well. That's the big thing. That 1% of the population are problem gamblers with the average debt of about £17,500.
But alcohol ruins lives, and I know you don't approve of that as well.
Well, I don't approve that either, but I am consistent on that. But
so that was a terrible question.
But this is for gambling.
Right question, wrong guest. But there are lots of things. What about freedom of choice, Dirk?
And how Mohammed can say we don't put anything back into the community, I'm really sorry to hear that, because at the end of the day, the facts speak for themselves. We support 100,000 jobs, we pay £1 billion in taxes, we are a part of the community. In Newham, we provide 400 jobs in the private areas.
Gambling, as was the attack on super casinos and the online industry and so on. And a good deal of the people here who criticise the machines, I think, would quite happily see the rest of the gambling industry very heavily regulated. It's not about making money, it's about allowing people to do what they want to do. And
it's a business. It's a business.
No, it's not.
The house always wins. Not the people always win.
Nothing.
To pick and mix religion, Rabbi Eli. To an extent, having thought about this, I mean, religions pick and mix religion, don't they? Because there's lots of the Bible and the Quran, there's lots of the Torah and the Bible, and who knows what other, pre-Christian, pre-Jewish myths were involved as well.
Not everybody does everything. They choose the things that are meaningful to them, and it's really about meaning and a search for meaning.
Edit out the stuff you don't like as well.
Absolutely, but it's about a search for meaning, and in fact, what we should be doing is being actually quite uplifted by the fact that people are on searches and they're interested in exploring different things because they're searching for meaning in their lives. There are a lot of Jewish Buddhists. Right. People who are Jewish, but they're also interested in Buddhism. Mm-hmm. If people are genuinely open and interested in spiritual matters, why wouldn't they explore other religious paths? But then you've got all those
people in North London, you've got those Jews for Jesus, and they have nothing but contempt from the Jewish community there.
Well, the issue of Jews for Jesus is slightly different, only because if people believe that Jesus is God, then that obviously is contradictory to the idea that there is only one God.
So it's picking and mixing to an extent.
Well, to an extent, but
the Catholic Church is interesting actually as a way of picking and mixing because you know, contraception, intrinsically evil, according to popes, and yet according to one survey, 69% of Catholics use contraception. That's picking and mixing, isn't it?
I think when we're talking...
Yes.
No, think about it there, okay. And why we can't pick and mix religion if we have a genuine faith is because we have a search for the truth. And therefore, I think there's going to always be... I'll come to a point where there's intellectual conflict, because if as a Christian we believe Jesus was the Son of God, it's a revealed religion, we believe this is the truth, then why are we suddenly going to believe actually there's Buddha and bits of Islam and bits of Hinduism? It makes no coherent sense.
There are actually not one truth, there are many truths. There's not just one way to God. There are many ways to God. So if
I could list right now about 200 Christian institutions across the world who believe that their truth is the truth. Yes. Among those would be the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church's idea of truth has evolved considerably over the years, particularly between the years 300 and 400 AD.
Caroline, if I may, Stan, sorry, yes. There's a very interesting point there. Exodus, suffer not a witch to live. Now, you've essentially pick and mixed that bit out, haven't you?
No,
otherwise,
absolutely not.
No?
Because as a Christian, we believe that Christ is a new covenant.
Right.
So his law supersedes the Old Testament. So we
you
appreciate...
ignore everything in the Old Testament.
But we appreciate... we say that Christ fulfilled the Old Testament. So
why don't you ignore the bits in the Old Testament about homosexuality? If you ignore the bit about witches?
Because it's very clear, Jesus talked very positively about marriage and what marriage. But if Christ, wanted to set out a vision of sort of homosexuality, he would have done so.
What did he say about witches then?
Why did he not?
Did he absolutely invalidate the witch thing?
Christ came and
Jesus is gay?
And possibly. No, Christ came and he said...
Very early on you said something that I think goes to the heart of this. And this is the arrogance of organised religion in saying we have the truth and we're in search of the truth. Critical thinking.
Your question, Abdullah. Right, you think the Quran is the word of God. I'd be fascinated to know the answer to this question, so address it. Now, Jodie here feels the power of Jesus. She feels a relationship with God. I'm right in saying that. Yes. You really do feel that strongly, don't you? Yeah. You really feel the power as well, don't you, Kevin? And Rabbi Ali, you really feel spiritual, and you feel that. And Caroline, you're a fantastic woman of really strong beliefs and strong faith, and you feel a relationship with Jesus and with God, don't you? Definitely. What are they feeling?
Well, I think there's a difference between truth and sincerity.
What are they? What experience are they having?
A person can sincerely believe on what their belief is the truth. Just because they do that doesn't mean it's necessarily true. It might be, might not be. But truth is external to the human being.
Just heard.
Truth is something that
assuming
that we're not nihilists. The truth is external.
What subjective experience are they having?
Well, as I said, that depends on the individual. I don't actually know those individuals. But all I'm saying is that there is a truth, and you can't pick and choose falsehood and truth and mix it together. You believe in something, and I think that in this society, even in this society, firstly, people believe in absolutes. You believe in human rights as an absolute thing. Not everyone might share the liberal definition of human rights. There's other definitions, and also there are minorities in this society which are told what to believe and what not to believe.
Caroline,
the one thing that that hasn't been highlighted here is we're all talking about truth, and